Good morning, everyone. Okay, couple things. One, what we would like to do is have you in the chat, put your name and a community where you're from. So like, for instance, Shorty from Mount Juliet, if you put your first name, I know who you are, but not everybody else does. So just make sure you put your name and your community that you're representing. If you're just going by first name, if it just comes up, like I saw one person that logged on just as Keith. I know several Keiths, so whatever community you're from, make sure that you put your name and a community that you represented. We're going to start taking attendance for these webinars to make sure leadership wants to see how many communities are participating in the webinars, where we're getting the most attendance and where there's areas that are deficient. So want to make sure that you put your name and your community in the chat so that we can know that you're here, and for certificates and other purposes that we can get that recorded for future reference. So we're excited to have this webinar today. It's something, I feel like 2022 has kind of been my year because I got Julius as my FEMA rep. Look at that beautiful smile. I got Julius, I have Cheyenne helping me. And so it's been a great time. We're really excited about floodplain management in Tennessee, helping folks. So with that, I'm going to let Cheyenne say a few words and then we'll get started.
Okay, and Amy, are you going to share the presentation from your screen?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all again for taking time out of your morning to join us for the Tennessee Floodplain Permit Playbook rollout. We're super excited to present this off to you all, as we feel that this is going to be a great tool for your daily tasks and responsibilities. As she said, I'm Cheyenne. I'm Amy's new assistant and the NFIP specialist for the state. And then, of course, we've got Amy and Julius on the call as well. As we go through the training, we know that you're going to have lots of questions, which we encourage. We just ask that you drop your questions in the chat box also. I will get to those as soon as I can, and either I will answer them or I will direct those questions to Amy and Julius for them to answer. With that being said, we can go ahead and move to the second slide. Okay, so if you all had a chance to look through the playbook, it's broken down into 5 sections, as well as the intro. So we've got the permitting guide, the sample permit, the permit review checklist, the elevation certificate checklist, and then the Tennessee property viewer instructions. Moving forward, Amy and Julius are going to talk about each of these, what they are, what each of these include, and why they were important to be included in the playbook. All right, and then I can go ahead and turn it over to Miss Amy.
Thank you, Cheyenne. Okay, so floodplain management is near and dear to my heart. It's something that I talk about a lot, something I think about a lot. And it's something kind of, I think Cheyenne would agree, kind of being in this office, we have a unique perspective to work with 402 communities statewide. We see some of the success stories, we see some of the challenges, and we see some of the areas that we can improve on as far as trying to help build the comfortability and confidence of local floodplain administrators. So Julius came back in June for that glorious week to help us with floodplain management. Kind of first time we met each other and spent some quality time together, kind of talking about the intro to floodplain management. And then we started talking about how can we help local floodplain administrators with floodplain management, because one of the biggest things that happens on a daily basis is folks have questions, right? Whether it be the floodplain administrators, whether it be citizens, whether it be developers, surveyors, engineers, realtors, insurance agents, so on and so forth. Everybody has questions. And so last night, when I was getting ready to leave, I had an insurance agent call me with some questions, and the local floodplain administrator said, I don't have any idea what you're talking about, call Amy. So that tends to be the standard safe responses. Everybody says, call Amy. And so with the amount of requests that I get, that Julius gets, that Cheyenne gets, we kind of wanted to have something for y'all to be able to answer some of the simple questions, or at least to have a frame of reference where to start. Because if you guys were to leave your job today, or if you were to go have lunch with one of your friends and say, I'm a floodplain administrator, most people would not necessarily understand what that means. So we're going to kind of go through this playbook today. We're going to go through the various pieces and parts to it. And we recently sent you the PDF and the Word document that whether you're technologically savvy and you want to use a fillable PDF, or if you're kind of like me and you're a dinosaur and you want to use the Word version because you don't necessarily love technology, there's something for everyone. So we're going to go through that today. So really the introduction to this playbook is to kind of make sure that communities are adopting and enforcing the minimum floodplain provisions in 44 Code of Federal Regulations 60.3. So as we talked about in many of the webinars, Section 60.3 talks about how there should be a permitting process in A1 and B1, that there should be permits for all kinds of development prior to proposed construction and development. So in theory, the buck stops with the local community as far as adopting the floodplain management provisions and making those literally their own through the adoption of an ordinance or a freestanding resolution. So the permitting playbook, we're really proud of this. We're going to make sure that we do the playbook and revise it every year. So we sent this out to 4 different communities prior to it being rolled out. And unfortunately, no one gave any comments. So what we want after this training today and what we want in the future is that if you love it, that would be nice to hear. If you think that there's missing an element or a piece that should be in here, we would like to know that as well. Because really, we're doing this for you and you guys are going to be using it a lot. So if you have praise, if you have additions, corrections, things that you want to add to this guide, we want to hear from you. So the permitting guide really details the permitting standards and processes for various types of development in the community. And it does have specific development standards and criteria that should be uniformly applied and enforced throughout the special flood hazard area. So as we go through this guide, you'll be able to see a starting point. When someone comes into your office and they say, hey, I want to develop, you should be able to look at this permitting guide and make a determination if the property or the proposed development is in a special flood hazard area. So one of the biggest things that floodplain administrators need to do, probably the easiest starting point, is being able to determine if a parcel is in the floodplain, also known as a special flood hazard area. So as you can see from this image, this shaded parcel here that has kind of like a little circle area has floodplain on the parcel. One of the beautiful things that we have here in Tennessee is that we have parcel lines on our maps that can help you determine if a specific site is in a floodplain. So I know I've told this story a million times, but when I first started my planning career back home, one of the things that I had to do was I had to do floodplain determinations, and I hated it because there wasn't any parcel lines on the map. So I had to sit there with a ruler and try to determine if a specific area was in a floodplain. So we are very blessed and very fortunate in Tennessee to have those parcel lines, because we have the Tennessee Property Viewer, similar to this image that we have on the screen that was taken from that website, that really makes it easy for most of the counties, probably what, 75 out of the 95 counties that have this feature, to be able to make a determination. If you're one of the communities that isn't on the Tennessee Property Viewer, you have your own GIS website, you have your own GIS technician that should have the National Flood Hazard Layer downloaded on the website so that you can make a determination. So this kind of lays out the steps for the Tennessee Property Viewer. So most of you guys are familiar with accessing the site. You can just Google Tennessee Property Viewer, it'll pop up, and then you can use the search criteria to select the county, the search type, whether it be a parcel, owner name, property address, and then subdivision. So then you're going to enter that specific information, click search, and then it's going to populate a map. One thing to make sure that you want to do is to show the FEMA Defirm flood map. You want to make sure that you click on that. Now, right now, because I use this website almost every day, sometimes it does take a moment for the flood layer to populate. So if you don't have a lot of patience, you may want to just take a moment and wait. Sometimes the various search engines, whether it's Google, whether it's Chrome, sometimes may take a moment. So sometimes you may have to switch and wait just to have that populate. So this is another schematic to kind of show if the property is in a floodplain. As I talked about a moment ago, if it's shaded, so if you're able to identify the parcel, you can see on the left-hand side here that if the parcel here, that parcel 4 is in a floodplain, it's in a shaded zone A area. And then you can also see on the right-hand side, Julius affectionately calls the floodway a candy cane, but I'm not sure that that's necessarily a sweet treat for people, but it actually delineates a high flood risk hazard area. So again, you can look at various parcels and you can hit the identify button and have it highlighted and show if it's in the floodplain, floodway. You can also turn on the T-dot imagery so you can see the house exactly. So you can get a greater level of detail. We just wanted to show it simplistically on this image. The next website that a lot of folks use is the FEMA Map Service Center website. So you can just Google FEMA MSC for Map Service Center. And you can go in there and anytime, day or night, you can type in an address and it will show you whether or not there's floodplain in the area. So again, you can type in the address. You can see where it says enter address, a place, or longitude, latitude, coordinates. You can enter that information, hit the search button, and it'll populate an image for you. And then you can also print a map of the parcel to format. So essentially, every community that participates in the National Flood Insurance Program gets flood insurance rate maps and gets a flood insurance study. But what's really great about this website is if you want to have a map, like if you're trying to do a floodplain determination, you can also do a format, which is actually just a specialized map of a specific address, a specific parcel, a specific structure, a specific area. You can go in here and get a map, just kind of like a smaller condensed map to show if an area is in the special flood hazard area. A lot of times, when we're doing audits, we're doing community assistance visits, we want to see that the community has done this determination. Julius and I have done a couple calves together, and sometimes we see it, sometimes we don't. So that's one way. If you're a floodplain administrator, you have these two great websites you can go to, type in the information and make a determination pretty easy. If the parcel is undeveloped and someone is proposing to have a structure built on there, and let's say the back half of the lot is in a floodplain and the front half is not, let's say it's closer to the road, then you want to have a site plan to have a specific determination whether or not that structure is in or out. We'll get into that a little bit later, but that's kind of a key to kind of see what's the level of risk on the lot. And again, talking about the placement of development, whether it's any kind of man-made change, improved or unimproved real estate. So requiring a floodplain permit. This is one thing that when I first started the job, I started in April of 2014. And so in June, I went up to Stan Harrison's house to spend the weekend with him and his wife, Linda. And one of the things we sat down at his kitchen table and did is we created a floodplain permit. So this is just kind of a sample statewide model. We didn't have one before. And we wanted to make sure that we had something that kind of covered all the bases. Because if we're asking some of you guys to create a permit, if you're brand new to the floodplain world, you don't know everything that's supposed to be on there. You don't know all the different types of development that's under the NFIP in the Code of Federal Regulations under 59.1. You may know, a lot of people think, well, I just got to worry about the structure, right? But it goes beyond that as far as having any kind of man-made change. So you can have mining, dredging, paving, grading, filling, excavating, storage of machinery, equipment, drainage facilities. You can have all that sort of thing listed for a permit. And most of the time when we've been doing audits lately, some of the permits just have, well, I'm on, let's say, map panel 219 and I'm in zone AE, but on the permit, it doesn't really have all the various types of development listed for floodplain management. So what we wanted to do with this permitting guide was to give you guys sample permits to show what that looks like. And if you don't have one, you're able to already have one created so you don't have to recreate the wheel, which is really important. So we're talking about site plan, delineating the floodplain. This is one thing that we need to strengthen statewide, because a lot of times people kind of arbitrarily draw the floodplain on the map, or there's just a little squiggly line or there's a little dash to say where it's at, but it's not drawn all the way on a site plan. So when you're working with surveyors, some of you guys may want to require that they download the National Flood Hazard Layer on their GIS. So when they're doing a site plan, that is actually drawn on there correctly. And some of you guys that maybe have local GIS technicians in your community may want to talk to them to say, hey, have you downloaded the National Flood Hazard Layer on our GIS server? So you can go under the FEMA Map Service Center website. You can click search all products, enter the state of Tennessee, the county that your community is located in, the community name, and you have these little drop downs, so it's not hard. You click search, and then under affected products, as you can see here from the screenshot, you have the National Flood Hazard Layer as NFHL data county, and you're going to download that. So this is one thing that when you're working with surveyors, a lot of you guys know your surveyors really well. Some of you guys have 3 to 5 that submit everything in your community, but you want to make sure that they take the National Flood Hazard Layer and download that on their site plans, because a lot of them are not good. They're deficient. They're missing various pieces and parts. I was looking at a swimming pool last week, and the surveyor put on the notes that he picked the downstream end of the parcel, but he was actually supposed to determine the BFE from the upstream portion of the parcel where the development was going to be occurring. So when you're looking at site plans, you just kind of want to sit down and look at it. Does it have all the pieces and parts for floodplain management? Some of you guys have subdivision regulations. You have various requirements for that, as well as zoning. You have setbacks and different things. Do you have all the pieces and parts for that site plan? If you look at that site plan, can you tell the nature and location of the proposed development? Do you have the elevations? Do you have the setbacks? Do you have the square footage, right? And sometimes when people do site plans, they have that building elevation and different things on there, and that's not the or the pad elevation. The minimum pad elevation is not the base flood elevation. There's a lot of confusion about that someone just puts that and they go, well, it's a foot above. Well, it's not exactly right. So you should be using the flood insurance study profile if it's in a zone AE. So again, making sure that the site plan has all the various elements is really important. So you can see here with the permitting guide, we actually have information for development standards. Because one thing, sometimes I quiz you guys. So one of my friends, who I'll leave nameless, texted me one time and said, hey, Amy, I think it's a zone A. They have to build 1 foot above the HAG. And so I texted the person back and I said, no, they have to build 3 feet above the HAG for a zone A and 1 foot above the BFE in a zone AE. So sometimes when you guys are asking questions, things get a little confused or a little twisted or whatever, that don't understand necessarily the development standards. So what we wanted to do in the playbook was kind of have, when you look at the information, when you kind of search through here and you go on page 2, So it has, so what we're going to do, if you guys have printed out the permitting playbook, we're kind of, all these slides actually go through the whole document. We go from beginning to end. So after you see about having a site plan, you're going to see where there's development standards for residential and non-residential. So if someone's coming in, they're building a structure and you go, oh crap, I don't remember what the standards are supposed to be for elevation. I can't remember them. That's one of the first things you'll see. And it's actually bolded for Zone A and Zone AE. And it actually has for Zone AE, the base flood elevation is derived from the flood insurance study profile. So we would like to see in the future that whenever we're looking at an elevation certificate, that there's a flood insurance study profile attached to it that has the base flood elevation determined to 1/10 of a foot. So again, if you're just working with somebody, or let's say you have a permit tech, you're going to review the site plan once you get it, and you have building inspectors that are going to go out and look at the construction as is underway, making sure that everybody understands this rules for elevation would be awesome. So again, if you're new to this permitting guide, right off the bat is going to tell you exactly what you need to know. Crawl space construction. So crawl space construction, a lot of the structures in Tennessee have a crawl space. So if you have footers that are below the base flood elevation, you can determine this by looking at the elevation certificate. You're going to look at B9 and then you're going to look at C2A to see what those elevations are. So if C2A, the elevation is below B9, then the crawl space is going to have flood openings for the structure. And as we've talked about many times, just for you guys to remember, so if you have crawl space construction, again, we're talking about being identical. So we're going to have 1 square inch of vents per 1 square foot of living space. So again, if you were looking at an elevation certificate and you go, okay, it's a diagram 8 or a diagram 9, and let's say I have a 1,500 square foot home, I want to have 1,500 square inches of vents. And so the foundation openings, or also known as flood vents, have to be automatic openings and not need human intervention. So if you have somebody that says, hey, I want to use a garage door, hey, I want to use the door that I go in and out of the garage, again, you need human intervention to open it, whether you use a little garage door opener or to open the door with your hand. Again, that doesn't count as openings. So you want to make sure that they have automatic openings, and then it needs to be within 1 foot of the natural grade, either interior or exterior. And again, in the comment section in section D of the elevation certificate, there should be information about that in case you don't know, or if it looks a little, or if you just walk up to the structure and it looks too high, it may be the interior grade. So you want to have that noted on the elevation certificate. Improvements to the structure, substantial damage and substantial improvement, and having cost estimates. So a lot of times when when we're doing audits and we're looking at documentation, there may be an addition to a structure. And one thing that we would like to start to see is the SDSI cost estimate sheets. So normally whenever I come to visit, I always like to bring gifts. So sometimes, I bring a lot of floodplain stuff, or like if I go visit Mike Hughes and I bring him cookies and brownies, sometimes I bring gifts, right? So the one thing that we would like to see more of is that if someone is doing an addition to a structure, an improvement, that there's an itemized cost of materials, labor, and estimates of those materials and labor. So you can't just go necessarily based upon the building code where it has, let's say I know one time we were looking at a community and I think it was $97 a square foot. You can't just necessarily look at that and say, well, they're doing a 200 feet of addition, so I'm just going to multiply that by 97 and that's how much it's going to cost. That doesn't work. So you want to make sure that you're passing out that substantial damage, substantial improvement cost estimate sheet to make sure that you're detailing all the various things, because it can be, cabinets, flooring, light fixtures, all sorts of things that maybe you wouldn't necessarily think of right off the bat. And then you're also going to be looking at the building valuation to make sure that the county property assessor, if you're looking at the tax card, or if you're looking at a cost estimating manual and tools from a professional building cost estimating service. As we've talked about before, whenever you're going to be doing the building valuation, whatever you use today, you're also going to be using that tomorrow. So you kind of want to have one standard that's set so that you have consistency in your program. Because you could say, well, I know Julius really well. He's cool. He can just give me whatever. And I don't like Amy, so I'm going to make her do something different. You want to treat everybody the same and make sure that the cost estimates are the same. You can get a qualified estimate of cost prepared by a local official using professional judgment. But again, you want to be careful on that as well, because some people may not like what you're doing. So my recommendation would be to use kind of like a building evaluation from the county assessor, because they have to do every single property in the community. So again, having the cost estimate sheets and making sure that they're reviewed versus the structure's fair market value. So you're going to review how much the cost estimates are going to be for the addition, if it's improvement, or if it's for damage, versus the fair market value. If the cost of the improvements is under 50% of the fair market value, you can issue a floodplain development permit and allow for construction. If the cost improvements is over 50% of the fair market value, the floodplain administrator is going to document that the structure must be brought up into compliance, right? So if it has to be brought up into compliance, the finished floor of the entire structure has to be elevated 1 foot above the base flood elevation for zone AE, and then 3 feet above the highest adjacent grade if it's in a zone A. If it's a non-residential structure and it's a substantial improvement, you can do floodproofing. But if it's residential, it has to be brought up into compliance. So it does, again, making sure that you have all your I's dotted and T's crossed. One time there was a community that had a business that was going to do an improvement, and then they were trying to use the insurance evaluation of the building instead of looking at the fair market value. So sometimes you have to look at the paperwork, because people will try to submit something that isn't necessarily the standardized way that you should be looking at it. And so they were trying to get out of doing this, or they're trying to get out of floodproofing the building, but unfortunately their cost estimate was over 50%. So they had to floodproof the building and they were not happy. So again, substantial damage. As Amanda Height or Larry LaScure can tell you, that doing substantial damage for a floodplain administrator, there has to be a procedure for that. So again, you want to visit the structure and use a substantial damage estimator software or a spreadsheet to document the damages. A few months ago, Julius did a tremendous webinar on substantial damage estimator software and using the spreadsheet. So if you guys don't have that, send us an email. We'll send it to you again. But it can help you calculate the damage. And then as a community floodplain administrator, you're going to write a letter to the homeowner to say either the structure was substantially damaged or it was not. So again, if it's under 50% of the structure's value that was damaged, it can be fixed to correct the structural and interior damage. If it's over 50% of the structure's fair market value and it's substantially damaged, it has to be brought up into compliance with the community's flood damage prevention regulations for new construction. And again, new construction, a lot of times we get questions about that. And that is when it's commenced on or after the effective date of the initial floodplain management ordinance, and includes any subsequent improvements to the structure. Utilities. We were going through this PowerPoint yesterday, and Julius is very familiar with these air conditioning units, as he had this in Philadelphia on his house. But again, for utilities, you want to make sure that all electrical, heating, ventilation, plumbing, air conditioning equipment, other service utilities are designed and located to prevent water from entering or accumulating within the components during conditions of flooding. So again, you want to make sure that they're elevated 1 foot above the base flood elevation in a zone AE, or if they're in a zone A, that they're elevated 3 feet above the highest adjacent grade. And then new and replacement water supply systems have to be designed to minimize infiltration of floodwaters. The same with sanitary sewage systems. And for on-site waste disposal systems, they should be located and constructed to avoid impairment to them or contamination from them during flooding. So again, that's where a site plan is really crucial, to be able to look to see where your water supply, your sanitary sewage, and where your on-site waste disposal systems are going to be located, and try to keep them out of the floodplain if at all possible. Stream alterations, one of my favorite things to talk about. Again, if there's a stream alteration in your community, whether it's a private citizen that's doing something, whether it's your local government that has a project, or if you have another grant applicant that's doing something along a stream, or they're doing any kind of alterations, you want to make sure that you notify me prior to any alteration or relocation. And then you're also going to want to submit that relocation and alteration to FEMA within 6 months to ensure that the community flood insurance rate maps are revised through the letter of map revision process. So we've had issues in the past where folks have been a little argumentative about what is an alteration, what is a relocation. But again, if someone is doing a project, making sure that you go out, first of all, look at the site plan to see if it's being altered, go out and do a site visit and make sure that your maps are revised. Because if you don't revise your maps, you could decrease someone's flood risk and increase someone else's. So you want to make sure that your flood insurance rate maps are revised over time so that you have a true and accurate picture of the flood risk in your community. And then you also want to make sure that you have, that whenever there's an alteration of the stream, that the flood carrying capacity is going to be maintained. So it can't just be, a lot of times I get people that call me and go, well, you know what, Amy, I just want to go in there and I want to rip out all the vegetation and I want to take out all the sediment and I want to alter it so that, you know, the water can go faster past my property and not flood me. But if you're altering that stream and there's no engineering analysis, you know, it's kind of like being sick. What is causing you to be sick, right? If, like, let's say, for instance, that I have a problem with my ankle and I hurt it and I go to the doctor. If he doesn't do a diagnostic test to see that I tore a tendon, he can put my foot in a boot and say, okay, Amy, just limp along, but I'm going to continue limping along until I actually figure out what is the root cause. And the same sort of thing, if there's going to be a stream alteration and having the water course maintained, there has to be some engineering analysis to it. And there has to be a review of that to make sure that it's going to be maintained and what kind of maintenance plan is going to be in the future. Because a lot of times we hear people say, well, just go in and dredge the stream, it'll be fine. Okay, well, what's causing that sedimentation to go into the stream and how are you going to improve water quality over time? You just can't constantly go in and dredge it because maybe you have stormwater issues, maybe you have sedimentation problems, maybe you have steep slopes. There's all different kind of things that can play into flooding in a community. And when people say they just want to go in and clear out things or dredge things with no real thought as to what is making this occur can be problematic. So for Zone A, we start to look at floodplain regulations. If you guys have a large lot subdivision where you have new proposals that have greater than 50 lots or 5 acres, whichever is the lesser, it has to include base flood elevation data. So if I have a 100-acre farm and it's in Zone A, and let's say Cheyenne buys it, and she's going to have a major subdivision, she's going to have to hire an engineer to complete a hydrologic analysis to determine what the base flood elevation is going to be for those lots. And the analysis must be reviewed by the state NFIP office for compliance of standard engineering practice. Because a lot of times I've had calls in the past where someone was going to do 50 lots in the Zone A, and I said, hey, you've got to have a BFE derived by an engineer. And I never ever heard in the future if that actually happened. So again, in some places in Tennessee that are rural, that are becoming more urbanized, this will continue to be an issue. So if you have a Zone A parcel and they're doing 50 lots or 5 acres, whichever is greater. You want to make sure that you have that BFE determined. And again, if you need help or if you get documentation, you want to make sure that it's reviewed for compliance, because if it isn't reviewed for compliance and someone just gives you something and you're not sure what they're basing it on, if those structures ever flood in the future, the community may be getting questions about, well, why did my house flood? Was this done correctly? So you want to make sure that everything that you do is in compliance so it doesn't come back to haunt you. So for manufactured homes, Julius and I were doing a CAV, was it last week? The time is flying by. But anyway, we were together last week and we were out at a manufactured home site. And so Julius was amazing because we were out there driving around and he said, this manufactured home is on dry stack. It's not anchored. It doesn't have that tie over frames tied up. And so, you know, we kind of had some examples where the manufactured homes weren't anchored to prevent flotation, collapse, and lateral movement. So that's one of the things that you want to make sure when you have a manufactured home, also known as a mobile home in your community, that it is anchored, that it's going to resist flotation, collapse, and lateral movement. And you want to make sure that the lowest floor of the manufactured home in a zone AE is elevated on a permanent foundation to no lower than 1 foot above the base flood elevation. And then for zone A without a BFE, you want to make sure that that manufactured home chassis is elevated and supported and reinforced by piers or other foundation elements of at least equivalent strength, and that that's at least 3 feet in height above the highest adjacent grade. So again, these are just some standards that we have for various types of development. So when you're looking at this permitting guide, if you have questions about a manufactured home, it's listed. And then the next one that we're going to talk about is a recreational vehicle. We have questions about this. So again, if it's a recreational vehicle and it's in a special flood hazard area, you want to make sure that there's a site plan and you want to know where the location of the recreational vehicle is going to be. Permit should be issued for 180 days. And then after 180 days, the recreational vehicle must be moved or a new permit and site plan be submitted. The recreational vehicle should be road ready, quick disconnect from utilities. So if there's a flood event, you're going to disconnect and you're going to haul that recreational vehicle off site, right? It shouldn't have a flat tire. It shouldn't be sitting there forever, right? It should not have any permanently attached structure or additions. So like we were out doing our cab together, we saw a recreational vehicle that had a porch on the back where someone was living out of it permanently. And if it is on the lot beyond 180 days with modifications, you should treat it as a manufactured home construction. Floodway and stream development. Talked a lot about this. We're going to be having another session in November. They'll probably be well attended by a lot of engineers. Still a lot of questions on this. So if you have a stream, if you have a floodway on a lot, even if you have a unmapped stream, if there's any kind of fill, if there's any kind of new construction, whether it be a bridge, if there's any kind of substantial improvement, if there's a structure, if there's other development within an adopted floodway or stream buffer area, it's going to trigger an engineering analysis. So the first thing that should happen is that the engineer should request a HEC-RAS model from the FEMA engineering library. Unfortunately, I do not have the software or the time to do it for the various requests, so it really should go through FEMA because FEMA is a clearinghouse. It's kind of like FEMA. It's kind of like the card catalog or the library that has all those models. I just dated myself, didn't I? But they have all those models in their library. So you make a request and you ask for the HEC-RAS model. It can take 6 to 8 weeks to obtain the modeling. So again, people need to be patient. I love the people that'll submit something on Thursday and then email me on Monday and say, why don't I have it already? Patience, right? And then having a project narrative, the who, what, where, when, why of what is being proposed at the site, having a topographic work map, having the engineering model. So a lot of you guys giggle because when we talk about stream encroachments, we kind of use the pecan pie analogy as far as making sure that you have all 5 models, that you have the effective, duplicate effective. So you have what FEMA gives you is the effective. You try to duplicate it on your computer. That's a duplicate effective. The corrected effective is any kind of non-man-made changes. So like, let's say you're going to use LiDAR, and then you have existing conditions, which is what's already there within the project area, and then what you're proposing to do at the site. All 5 of those models, if you want to hit a home run or you want to score a touchdown, you have to have no rise, no changes in the base flood elevation, floodway width, or base flood discharge. Very hard to do. And then there's cross-section plots so that when you're looking at a study area, you have cross-sections to show the base flood elevation if there's any kind of changes. Then you have a property survey and an as-built certification. So if you're building a bridge, the engineer has to sign off on that it's certified. And then if there are changes to development along a stream, again, asking for permission, you have to submit a conditional letter of map revision stating what you're proposing to do. And it has to be within 1 foot, because if it's 1 foot or greater and there's any insurable properties nearby, FEMA will deny the project. Notice I said FEMA will deny the project. And then once the project is completed, in order to revise the maps, you have to do a letter of map revision within 6 months for post-project construction to make sure that if there's any kind of increases or changes in the base flood elevation, base flood discharge, or floodway widths are revised on the flood insurance rate map, as well as a flood insurance study. Shaded zone X. Shaded zone X has become an issue that we've had a lot of questions about. Again, as we talked about at the beginning of this webinar, you want to make sure that you require a site plan to ensure that the structure or the development is in the shaded zone X area from the national flood hazard layer. And if it is confirmed that it is entirely in the shaded zone X area, it doesn't fall under the NFIP regulations. Let me say that again. If it is completely in shaded zone X, it doesn't fall under the NFIP regulations. So if the structure or any non-structural development is in a shaded zone X or in a zone X, an elevation certificate is not required. We've had several communities requiring elevation certificates for zone X. That is not correct. You're essentially asking folks to do something that is not required. You're going beyond your scope of written regulations. So unless you have it adopted and written in your regulations requiring it, you shouldn't be doing it.
Agree. Adding to what Amy just alluded to, we have seen this issue in numerous communities. We have done audits and CAVs for recently. You know, Amy and I always tell communities, we'll always defend you, we'll always support you as long as you're enforcing your regulations. But if you're enforcing stuff that's not in your regulations, it's not possible for Amy and I to provide you support. If there's ever homeowners question you, or if there's ever a lawsuit brought to the community regarding a zone X requiring an elevation certificate. So if it's not in your regulations, please do not require property owners or developers to provide you an EC for zone X. It's not in your regulations, and NFIP doesn't require it.
So we've had that issue a lot. So we have this in here. So if you guys have questions and you're not sure, it's written in here. It's on page 4 of your permitting guide. You guys can take a look at it if you have questions. And if you still have heartburn about this, or maybe your community is doing it and you want to talk to Julius and I separately after this webinar, we can talk to you some more. If it's something that you want to revise your regulations, again, if you're going to revise your regulations, you need to ask us to review it to make sure that it's compliant. That way that you don't have further issues. Because one thing I love about Julius is whenever someone wants to do a text change in an ordinance, like he and I will sit down and look at it and talk about it. And so we have one community where we met with the floodplain administrator, I think 4 weeks in a row, going through ordinance text changes. And the great thing about us is like Julius is sweet and I'm kind of spicy. And so when we meet with, it's true, right? When we meet with communities, like I'll kind of say, yeah, I don't think this is a good idea. And then Julius will say, how are you going to enforce this? Like if you leave tomorrow, is the community going to be able to enforce this? So we kind of balance each other out. I think he balances me out more than I do him. But if you're going to have any kind of text changes in your ordinance, you want to make sure that you kind of get Team Jack, Julius, Amy, Cheyenne to make sure that it's compliant. I had to do it. So, all right, the sample permit. So this is an example of, you guys saw earlier in the presentation that we had the Word document of the floodplain development permit. So Julius, being amazing as he is, said, hey, Aim, we need to have a fillable PDF for communities. So if you guys are looking at the permitting guide, there's actually a fillable PDF that you can use for your community. So if you want to be a little bit more high tech, you want to be a little bit flashier, there's a sample permit, there's a PDF that's fillable. If again, you're more like a dinosaur like me and you just like that Word document, you can do that. But again, the sample permit is really a comprehensive application that details the nature, location, and type of development within the special flood hazard area. So other human activities that are considered development include, but are not limited to, alterations of a structure through additions, demolition, remodeling, fences. Fences should be as part of the permit, retaining wall, moving, placement of remanufactured mobile homes, campgrounds, storage of machinery, equipment, such as vehicles and materials. So like if you have a storage yard or a salvage yard. So, you know, if you guys haven't had time to really sit down and look at the sample permit, I would really encourage you to look at it after this training so that you can become familiar with it. It's very detailed. For some of you guys will be like, wow, I never ever thought that there was so much to it. But there really is. But if you want to make sure that you have something that's comprehensive, this permitting playbook is really where it's at, because a lot of the communities that we've done audits, one of the things that everybody's been deficient across the board is with administrative procedure. It's kind of like you have a little bit, but maybe you don't have everything when it comes to pieces of the puzzle. And so this permitting playbook, if you really use it the way that we have designed it to be, you're going to have less headache and heartburn as you go through floodplain management, because you'll have a guide reference to kind of help you kind of funnel requests and be able to sit down and go, okay, what do I need to do? So having that sample permit kind of documents what is being proposed on the site, having the elevation certificate checklist, having the permitting checklist, all these different checklists means that you've actually sat down and reviewed what someone is doing. You reviewed it for compliance, for completeness. And then once you kind of issue that certificate of occupancy, if you have a building inspector, or if you're just going to put the documentation after you reviewed it, you're going to put it in the file, you have confidence knowing that you did a good job, that you did everything you were supposed to do. Right. And so we tried to break this down so that it's more manageable steps, so that some of you guys don't feel so overwhelmed or you have that anxiety kick up 100-fold. Just trying to have all this stuff together to make sure that it's easy.
And also, Amy, on the permitting, so when Amy and I and Cheyenne was creating the permitting guide for local communities, we understand, you know, some folks like stuff being fillable if they have an iPad, they have their laptop. Other folks want to print it out and have it in their hand. So the sample permit that's in the fillable PDF, it's comprehensive. It's about 5 pages long, but kind of walks you through, especially for an applicant, to understand what is the community regulation. So any of the documents we are giving you guys, feel free to add your community logos, modify it for your community. This is just a baseline, like a foundational piece for you guys to build off on. If you like it just as if, use it just as. If you want to make modifications to be more reflective of your community and your standards, as well as if you want to add your logos or any additional touch to make it unique to your particular community, it's you guys' documentation, it's you guys' permitting guide. Make changes to it. all Amy and I and Cheyenne are trying to do is just give every community the same baseline for floodplain management in Tennessee. So moving forward, there won't be no more excuses where I don't have a permitting guide, I do not know what to do. We want to create one standard for all our communities, and your communities are able to modify it for your community, because we know every community have different higher standards, you know, so just modify those documents, but it's your document, so take ownership of the document.
Thank you. So for the floodplain permit, again, anyone that's undertaking any kind of development within a designated floodplain should obtain a permit prior to the commencement of any kind of development activity, right? So on this slide here, we have the definition, development. So is any kind of man-made change, improved or unapproved real estate, including but not limited to, if there's a building, if there's other structures, mining, dredging, filling, grading, paving, excavation, or drilling operations, as well as storage of equipment or materials. So again, we talked about just a moment ago, there's other kind of human activities. So we have all this kind of information on the floodplain development permit. If you use a PDF, it has miscellaneous things on here, such as a bridge, a culvert, demolition, a fence, and then, you know, what type is it? Temporary? Is it permanent? Is it emergency repair? Is it maintenance? So it really has everything you could ever want on here to be able to ask questions. Because like if let's say that my twin sister decided to come in and develop a piece of property in a floodplain, she's not going to necessarily know what to ask, right? She's going to say, yeah, I want to build a house. Okay, well, what else do you want to do? And so this is kind of a way for some of you guys, like if you don't feel strong on talking to people, you don't feel strong on what to ask or what to do, this permitting guide, this permitting form really has everything you could ever want on here, just to kind of help the conversation. Because some of you guys do a really good job. Some of you guys struggle. Some of you guys do better than what you think. Some of you guys maybe think you do better than what you really do. I don't know. But, you know, it's kind of like every shade of the rainbow. Some people do it really well. Some people don't. But we just kind of want to enhance that comfortability and kind of have more information for you guys to use. This is just like an early Christmas present from Julius, Amy, and Cheyenne to you guys. It's an early Christmas present. You know, a lot of you guys have been good this year. Hopefully, Santa, I don't think I've been good this year, but we want to make sure that everybody has. Well, see, Julius is coming in December, and I'm excited because we're going to have early Christmas in my office. But anyway, so we want to make sure that you guys kind of have the tools in your toolbox to be able to help folks when they're developing in the floodplain. So we also have a permit review. So it's great to have a permit to say, okay, the who, what, when, where, why. That's great, right? But then once you start to have development, what else do I need to review? Like, what do they need to give me? How do I get this administrative process together? How do I tackle this? That's the next question, right? So once you kind of go through the permit application, the next thing that we did, that Julius did a great job helping with, was having a permit review checklist, right? So it compares the applicant development permit and any additional documentation that's needed for compliance, right? So again, just because someone's proposing to do something, you need to have documentation, verification, confirmation that they're doing whatever I say I'm going to do, I actually did, right? So you have this permitting guide checklist, kind of make sure that you have the general information that you need to make sure that the development is in compliance. So we're going to kind of go through each section so that you guys can see it. We're going to talk about, hit some of the high points, and then continue on with some of the other elements of the permitting playbook. So the first part of this section is talking about general flood zone designation, right? Essentially the where, right? What firm panel number? What's the date of the firm panel? What flood zone am I in? Am I in a floodway? What's the base flood elevation? What vertical datum is it under? And again, the vertical datum, whether it's North American vertical datum 88, or if it's, I think it's North geodetic vertical datum 29. You need to make sure that you know which one is for your flood insurance rate map. It has it under the notes to users, or it has it under one other section on the map. And I can't remember it right now, and it'll hopefully come to me. But making sure that that vertical datum is the same as a flood insurance rate map. How is a BFE determined? Notice that we have the FIS, the Army Corps, or FEMA. It should not be marked firm, right? So if you get an elevation certificate and a marked firm, and I'm looking at this checklist to make sure that things are compliant, that should be a huge red flag to go, okay, they didn't determine that base flood elevation correctly for a zone AE. And then what's your required freeboard? Most of you guys have 1 foot. If you're Metro Nashville, you're going to have 4 feet. And then making sure that you have the required finished floor elevation for lot grading. And then if there's any kind of letter of map changes, they're approved or denied. And then if there's any kind of flood resistant materials used below the BFE and the required freeboard. So if you're having a floodproofing or floodproofing a structure, you would have information there. For zone AE, so we've kind of broken this down a little bit based upon what zone we're talking about. If it's a zone AE or a zone A, there's certain things, elements that should be part of the permitting review. So again, is my finished floor elevation for all new and substantial improvements in the special flood hazard area? Is it to the base flood elevation plus the required freeboard? So if I'm looking at the elevation certificate, if I'm looking at B9, what's my BFE? And then if I'm looking at C2A, what's my finished floor elevation? So again, you kind of look at it to see, does it meet it? And required top and bottom floor elevations. Do I have my elevation certificate? Is it a finished construction elevation certificate? Some of you guys have regulations where you require under construction elevation certificate as well as finished construction elevation certificate. What all documentation do you have? You should not be issuing a certificate of occupancy if it's for under construction, or when we've been doing audits, we've seen elevation certificates for construction drawings. People are just accepting whatever and they're not looking at it. That's a problem. So again, with this permitting guide, this review checklist, you want to make sure, is the elevation certificate completed? Is it for finished construction? Another pet peeve, don't write on it. We've seen people write on it lately. I had someone joke with me the other day about how they sent an elevation certificate that was completed to a property owner, and then the person put in the email, Amy, don't have a heart attack because I wrote on it. So she put that to the applicant like, hey, make sure. But then you also want to make sure for an attached garage, you provide the top of slab elevation. And then again, if you're having a crawl space, to make sure that the total area of all permanent openings are identified within 1 foot above the adjacent grade, either interior or exterior, and at the lowest elevation of machinery, equipment, service of building. 1, that it's identified, and 2, that it's 1 foot above the base flood elevation, including the ductwork. So this is something that if you have building inspectors that are going out and looking at this, maybe can help you kind of look at it. For zone AE, this is all you really have to worry about. These are kind of the high points. We didn't list everything on this, but we listed the things that we see a lot of deficiencies that can be improved upon.
Amy, while you're on this page, go back to the previous slide. The other cool feature we did when we was creating this document is to really try and make it user-friendly, is that we have built-in links into the review guide. So you see where it says that link for the FEMA elevation certificate. So if you're not familiar with the FEMA EC, or you're not sure where to get a copy, in the review guide, there's a link that takes you directly to the FEMA website where you could download the current FEMA EC. It currently expires, I think, November 2022. You could use this EC until FEMA issues a new one. So even if it expires in November, surveyors can continue to use it until FEMA issues a new EC. So if you have questions, or folks say, hey, it's December, the EC file is expired, you could still continue to use it until FEMA issues you a new one. So throughout the guide, there's going to be various links in there that's going to take you to different FEMA websites, whether that's technical bulletins or the EC or the dry flood proofing certificate. So in that way, you have a one document where you could get links to additional information. And we also included a link to all the additional FEMA technical bulletins. So you have one document to shop for all technical resources that you may have a question for. So before you reach out to Amy or myself or Cheyenne, you could check out those links. And if you have additional questions, then you kind of reach out to us for further technical assistance.
That's one thing I love about Julius is he's always like, hey, make sure there's links in the document so people can get to other things. So for zone A, so if you have development that's in a zone A where no base flood elevation has been determined, you want to make sure that the top and the bottom floor for all new and substantial improvements in the special flood hazard area are 3 feet above the highest adjacent grade. Same with the attached garage. If there's an attached garage, the top of the slab should be 3 feet above the highest adjacent grade. And then if there's a crawl space construction that you have flood openings, this should be within 1 foot above the adjacent grade, either interior or exterior. And if there's engineered vents, you want to make sure that you have that documentation attached to the elevation certificate. And then if you want more information, there's technical bulletin number 1. And then as well as making sure that the lowest elevation of machinery equipment servicing the building is 3 feet above the highest adjacent grade. And you want to make sure that any utility systems that are within the crawl space are elevated above the base flood elevation if it's known, or designed so that it can't accumulate. Floodway encroachments, again, if you have development that is encroaching a stream, you want to make sure that there's a no rise or no impact certification and supporting data. Again, it must show a 0 rise. So again, if you have any of those kind of projects, you want to make sure that it's submitted to my office for review. We are in the process, hallelujah, that we're going to be getting an engineer on staff, hopefully by January, that will start to do those reviews. So if you have any kind of development that's along a stream, it's kind of an unfunded mandate that most communities don't have an engineer on staff to help them. So you want to make sure that you kind of have that added support from my office to make sure that it's compliant. Again, no fill should be placed into floodway unless there's an engineering review. If there's any kind of changes we talked about before, you're going to ask for permission, and you're going to submit that to FEMA as a conditional letter of map revision. And then within 6 months, you're going to submit a letter of map revision. If there's any kind of placement of manufactured homes, there has to be an engineering analysis, the same, making sure that you have free of obstructions below the base flood elevation. So if you have a zone AE without a floodway, zone A, and unmapped streams, this is talking about having an engineering analysis where you can have up to a 1 foot rise. There still has to be an engineering analysis submitted for review. If there are changes, it is recommended to revise the maps through a conditional letter of map revision or a letter of map revision. You'll see that this is highlighted. This will take you to the MT2 website as far as how to submit all that paperwork. No fill should be placed in the zone AE without floodways, zone A, or unmapped streams in the buffer area unless an engineering analysis is provided to show that there's less than a 1 foot rise. And again, that technical data should be submitted to FEMA to revise the maps. Same with the placement of a manufactured home, there has to be an engineering analysis and free of obstructions below the BFE. So again, it's sort of the same. All these development projects that are encroaching a stream kind of all have the same sort of standards, that there has to be an engineering analysis submitted prior to the commencement of development. If there's changes in the modeling in the base flood elevation, floodway widths, or base flood discharge, that you have to submit to FEMA prior to development to get blessing. And then once you construct it, within 6 months, you're going to revise the flood insurance rate maps and the flood insurance study profile so that you have a more accurate depiction of your flood risk in the community and the data for future development. For non-residential, for floodproofing a structure in zone A, commercial structure. So again, this is non-residential. Non-residential are the only type of structures that can be flood-proofed. So commercial structures with the finished floor below the base flood elevation can be engineered to be flood-proofed 1 foot or greater above the base flood elevation or elevated to the prepared base flood elevation. So FEMA Technical Bulletin number 3 has a lot of information on how to do floodproofing. So if you guys are super excited about floodproofing, next month we're going to be doing a webinar on it. So if you have more information and you need assistance, making sure that you have a floodproofing certificate should be required before the permit is finalized. So again, you want to look to see if they're using flood resistant materials. How are they dealing with the hydrostatic, hydrodynamic forces? Is there a maintenance plan? You want to see all that information. They can't just sign off on that floodproofing certificate and say, yeah, we're going to do all this stuff and not have documentation to go with it. And again, if they're using flood protection and flood barriers, it has to be identified on the plans, and making sure there's operation procedures are required. Again, you don't want to wait until there's a flood event and go, oh, hey, you know, this is what I'm going to do. So then we have accessory structures for zone A. Again, if there's an accessory structure, there should be a permit for it to make sure that the structure is for storage and it's not for any kind of human habitation and it's not climate controlled. So Julius always gives a really good example that when you're going to go, you're kind of doing floodplain reviews, like maybe sometimes drive at night and see if there's a little blue light or see if it became a man cave. I thought that was funny when we were in our last meeting together. He was saying that. It was funny. But you want to make sure that it's an accessory structure, that it doesn't have any kind of utilities that, let's say, grandma's going to go live in, or that you get mad at your spouse and you want to go live in it. You want to make sure that it's not for human habitation and it has flood resistant materials, that's anchored to resist flotation and lateral movement, that has permanent flood openings. And if the accessory structure is of low value, you want to make sure it's not like $100,000 accessory structure that's going to be someone's like little mini or house or something. And then making sure that the service facility electricity has to be elevated above the base flood elevation or flood proofed if it is not. So remodeling, as we talked about before, is it going to be a substantial improvement? Is it going to be 50% or greater than the fair market value? So again, it has to be any one or more combination of repair, reconstruction, rehabilitation, addition or improvement of a building, of the structure. And again, if it exceeds 50% of the fair market value, the structure has to be brought up into compliance. And again, as we talked about before, having that SDSI cost estimate sheet, looking at the fair market value and then doing a little bit of math to see is it over 50% of the fair market value. So again, if you don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, if they're just coming in, they want to try to hurry up and do it, give them that sheet and say, hey, I need some information from a reliable source, whether they're using a contractor or something, but it should be documented and all the various aspects. They can't come in and say, well, I'm just going to put a 100 square foot addition, just give me a permit. They need to explain everything that they're doing. And again, making sure that you have a copy of a signed construction contract and making sure that it's uninhabited space. If it's going, if the remodel is of uninhabited space to habitable space is below the base flood elevation is prohibited. Again, you want to make sure that it's above the base flood elevation. A couple reasons. One, for flood insurance purposes, if it's below the BFE, they're going to get hammered on flood insurance rates. And then if it's below the BFE and they're going to be habitating it, like you guys could see in Chicago, they had that flood event over the weekend where they got 6 inches of water or 6 inches of rain. And then there was water in the basement, water in the houses, and people were kind of panicking about it. Again, you want to make sure that you don't have that issue in your community where you have first responders having to go out and rescue people. No remodel or conversion of space below the BFE is allowed. No new additions, vertical or lateral, for pre and post firm structures without being elevated on an elevated foundation designed to new construction specifications within the flood damage prevention regulations. So again, these are just some things to have conversations with folks to go, hey, want to make sure that these are this criteria is being met. And again, this kind of helps with just talking with folks to make sure that everybody's on the same page for permitting and what's allowable in your community.
Amy, one other thing to add on the substantial damage, substantial improvement section. One thing that we require in all communities that have either open calves or new calves in the future is we're going to have every community create a substantial damage plan. The reason why we're doing this is because what happened with the city of Waverly and Humphreys County and all the surrounding areas last year can happen to any one of our communities in Tennessee. So we want to be very proactive and having procedures in place. So if a situation does happen to your community, instead of a community scrambling, trying to figure out, okay, what does substantial damage mean? What am I supposed to do with all the structures that's impacted in the special flood hazard area? So we working with communities to create substantial damage plan. It don't have to be super crazy. It's just something that's gonna be like kind of straightforward and say, hey, if we have an event in our community, this is how we're gonna respond to it. This is what we're gonna do to assess the buildings, because we want to assess this as quickly as possible before folks start doing repairs. Because you hate to come back and say, hey, your building substantially damaged, you trigger that 50% mark, and now you spend all that money to repair the building and it's non-compliant. So we're trying to avoid that for local communities. So so if you do have an audit with myself or Amy, this is just a requirement besides doing trainings, is creating a substantial damage plan, just in case something does happen in your community. And also with FEMA disaster, DR 1206 Disaster Recovery Reform Act, if there is a federal disaster declaration in your community, now you'll be able to get reimbursed for doing substantial damage, doing floodplain management. So having a plan in place kind of give you a kind of a foot ahead of if you ever have a federal disaster declaration. So everything that Amy and I and China are trying to do is trying to be proactive. While we have blue skies, you never know when another event's gonna happen. We just want our communities to be very proactive. So everything that we're trying to do, guys, is just simply trying to put you guys on a better footing when it comes to floodplain management for your local communities.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is probably, I have to say this probably next section is probably my favorite, because I sat down and I got inspired, and I sat down on a Monday night at home on the couch and kind of did this whole thing. So some of you guys giggle because whenever, I think I probably have a reputation for whenever I review elevation certificates, because people say, oh, she's going to make it bleed, or, oh, she's going to find something wrong with it, or, oh, I got one, I'm not sure it's right, I'll just send it to Amy and she can review it. So I can tell you that what's wonderful to me is that Cheyenne, now that she's been here long enough, she knows how excited I get about reviewing elevation certificates, and she's kind of caught the bug and she enjoys reviewing them as well. So sometimes we sit whenever we do an audit and we'll kind of go through all the documentation and kind of see some of the errors that are on elevation certificates. So she's starting to see patterns of things that are going really well, things that are not going so well, and areas of improvement. So this is probably, I'll admit, this is my favorite section. And so I will sit here and smile the whole time, because really this checklist is if Amy Miller was sitting beside you, right? So this is kind of like my, love letter for elevation certificate review. This is kind of, if you wanted me beside you, if you really wanted me to do it with you, this is as close as you're going to get. So unless you guys call me and say, hey, Amy, I need help. But if you can't get a hold of me, or if you just say, I want to try to get better at this, and I want to try to be more like Amy, here we go. So the elevation certificate checklist is going to verify that the structure was built in compliance with the community's flood damage prevention regulations. And it's really documentation of elevation information, confirmation if there's foundation openings, and machinery equipment, anchoring, and elevation. So essentially this checklist is really looking at every single section of the elevation certificate and determining whether it's compliant or not. Because I think the elevation certificate, I think there's 12 pages of instructions. A lot of times some of the fussing that I get about things that are wrong is because no one's ever sat down and read the instructions. And so whenever we teach the certified floodplain surveyor class, we sit for 2.5 days and teach surveyors how to do elevation certificates a little better, and simple letter of map changes. Some of them always kind of look a little bit astonished that they never ever read the instructions, or they were taught wrong, or just didn't know, right? So we're going to kind of go through this whole section, and some of it you guys will giggle a little bit. And I'm sure Bart Crowdy was on this webinar. There's one little thing that I highlighted on there that he would laugh because he knows it drives me crazy. So the elevation certificate, as Julius mentioned a few moments ago, With the link that's within the permitting guide, this is an example of what the elevation certificate looks like. You have the nice little cover page, and then it's a fillable PDF. We just did the first page, so that way you guys could see it. But this is what you should be getting. And as you talked about a moment ago, it does expire, I believe, November 30th, 2022, but we will still continue to use it until FEMA has a new certificate ready. Once it's going to be rolled out, we will let you know ahead of time so you can prepare for that. So the elevation checklist, as you notice here, there's a lot of red. So I felt like if I just kind of called out certain things for certain sections, it would be easier for you guys to remember. And when you're reviewing an elevation certificate, to make sure that it's compliant. So the first thing is making sure that you have a building owner's name, pretty simple. And then you'll notice for A2 that it should be for one address only. So when Julius and I were doing an audit, we were looking at some of the elevation certificates, and it would say 900 to 925, let's say Walnut Street. It should be for one address only. Because for flood insurance purposes, they're looking at just that structure only. So again, property description, making sure that you have the lot and block information, tax parcel info, or a legal description. There should be something in there, and it should be specific to that structure or parcel. Building use, there's 4 different kinds. A lot of times we see something where it'll say like hair salon or insurance agency or something, but you want to make sure that it's only 4 types, right? It should say residential, non-residential, addition, or accessory. That's it. It really shouldn't be that hard, but people make it hard. I don't know why. Latitude and longitude should be measured from the center of the building, and there's examples below. So these are examples. Latitude and longitude for decimal degree, you want to make sure that it's a negative for the longitude, so you're in the correct hemisphere. So again, those are just examples, just cut and paste examples from the back of the document and the instructions that based upon what the surveyor is doing, whether it's decimal degrees, decimal or degrees, minutes, seconds, or decimal degrees, that you at least have 5 decimal places or better. So you have examples. If it doesn't look like that or it looks something weird, you can ask the surveyor, hey, what are you trying to do? Because this doesn't look right, okay? Horizontal datum should be 1983, NAD 1983. Color photographs. This is one thing that when we were doing an audit with Julius, sometimes we don't see color photographs. Sometimes we don't see any photographs. Sometimes we see vacant lots, but it should be 2 photographs, front and rear view with the date of the building. It should be with the elevation certificate. The next section is building diagrams. I'm not going to go through necessarily all these, but what I will say is that if you have questions about building diagrams, the elevation certificate in the back within the instructions actually has pictures. If it's slab on grade, if there's a basement, if it's split level, if it's a mobile home, if it's a crawl space, that sort of thing. So there's, based upon what you're going out to see, if you're doing inspections or you have a building inspector, if you're looking at the elevation certificate and you're reviewing it, those are all the different various building diagrams and what type you should look at. Now, slab on grade is pretty easy, right? So again, it's either a regular one or it's raised. You really shouldn't, as a community, have basement structures, because for flood insurance purposes, it's going to get hammered because it's going to be the top of the bottom floor, and they're going to evaluate flood insurance policy based upon the elevation of the basement. So you really shouldn't have basements, and then so on and so forth. So if you're having a manufactured home or a mobile home, that's always a diagram 5. Sometimes, like I've reviewed elevation certificates where they've had weird numbers for stuff and people arguing about it. But again, you have those, you have those images in the back, those building diagrams, pictures with specific information. So this is just kind of a cheat sheet. If you don't want to flip all the way to the back, this just kind of tells you what you're looking at. So again, for a crawl space or enclosure, that's going to be for building diagrams 6 through 9. That's where you're going to have information as far as the number of permanent openings that are 1 foot above adjacent grade. And in the comment section D, it should say whether it's interior or exterior grade. Total net flood openings, 1 square inch per 1 square foot, no higher than 1 foot above grade, either interior or exterior. And then, as we talked about before, being identical. So if I have a 1,500 square foot home, I'm going to have 1,500 square inches of vents. There's an example here. Again, if I have a, let's say, accessory structure and it's 500 square feet, I need to have 500 square inches. So again, if you're brand new to this and you can't remember all this stuff or spit it out like I can, you have this here that you can look at. Okay, really simple. If there's engineered flood openings, do you have the International Code Council Evaluation Service, that's ICC-ES documentation with your elevation certificate? A lot of times we see where people mark that it's engineered, but we don't have any of that documentation. Again, you should ask for it. With risk rating 2.0, they're talking about how that citizens can do mitigation measures. So if I have a crawl space and I don't have foundation openings, I can put foundation openings in to lower my flood insurance rate. This is something that's going to be an issue in the future. So again, if you have crawl space construction, having that documentation with the elevation certificate is important, because if somebody thinks that they're paying too much for flood insurance and they can't find their elevation certificate, they can't find their documentation, they're coming back to your office to ask for it. If you have that attached to the elevation certificate, you can give that to them and kind of help them out. That's a good thing. Attached garage, determining factor, is there living space above it? If there's no living space above it, it is considered a garage. Under the permitting playbook, so everybody got the PDF version, everybody got the Word version. So in the Word version, we had a little bit of extra space. So Roger Lindsay, you should be smiling, because we put those diagrams of what's an enclosure versus an attached garage. We put that in there with the triggering factors in case you have questions and you're talking to surveyors and they're not sure either, or they haven't ever been to a training. You have that information. So Section B talks about flood insurance rate map information. Again, pretty simple. So again, if I'm Jack Williams and I'm in the city of Fayetteville, I'm going to love this example because I put their community identification number. So everybody, when you guys get done with this, if you take the playbook and you kind of mark on this and you can write in there your community identification number, like Julius always says, every community has a social security number for the NFIP. So you can go ahead and write in here what your CID number is. You can memorize it. Like I know Metro Nashville's is 470040. Don't ask me the other 401 because I don't know them all. But you guys should know what your CID number is to make sure that when you're getting an elevation certificate that the development is in the correct community with the correct CID number. County name, state of Tennessee, pretty simple. People shouldn't mess that up. Map panel number. This is an example of what a map panel should look like for B4. Again, it shouldn't just be the last 3 digits. It should be the whole shebang, minus the suffix on the end. For B5, you're going to have the suffix if it's C, D, E. And then the one thing that I've seen consistently through the whole time I've been sitting at this desk is that a lot of surveyors do not understand where to find the firm index date. If you look under the FEMA Map Service Center website, and if you click on affected products, when the list populates, the first one has, under that list has the index date, it has the IND, I can't read, IND, and then I think it has A, and then it has the effective date. So it's the first one in the list. So we put this in here as a screenshot that this is how you determine your index date, and then your firm panel / revised date. So you're going to check the FEMA Map Service Center website, and you can figure out when you look at a flood insurance panel, it'll have the effective date to the right. That's an example. Flood zone, again, for an elevation certificate, you're going to list if it's in zone A, zone AE, AO, AH, or let's say example, you have AE and zone X on the parcel. But you're going to list those flood zones on the elevation certificate for B8 and then B9. And then this is only for zone AE that has base flood elevation information available. It's going to be measured to 1/10 of a foot. So again, you're going to use that flood insurance study profile, going to use the upstream corner of the structure. measure perpendicular to the stream center line, and then use a flood insurance study profile to get to 1/10 of a foot. So source of the base flood elevation should only be the FIS profile or Army Corps of Engineers, and the flood insurance profile should be included in the elevation certificate attachments. And then again, with my enthusiasm, if it's missing, request it. Some of you guys don't like conflict and you don't like to ask people for stuff, but again, from a compliance standpoint, if someone marks that they have that they use a profile, then ask for it. If you don't have it, then that kind of, you just have to say, hey, did you really use it? Because I'm not going to issue the certificate of occupancy until I get it. And then the elevation datum for the BFE. For older firms, you're going to look under notes to users. And then for newer firms, you can refer to the map projection. So with the new maps, like if I'm Metro Nashville, under the map projections, it'll say if it's NAVD 88 or if it's NGD, well, they're all NAVD 88. But anyway, it'll tell you that if you've never ever looked at that, if you have older firms, it has that listed under there, what the elevation datum is. And if it's newer, you're going to look under the map projection. If you guys have questions, we can, in a future webinar, have that on there or in the intro to floodplain management training. Coastal barrier resource systems, we don't have it. So you're always going to have that, always should be marked NA. Okay, my favorite's coming up. So for the elevation checklist, it's great because when I highlighted this, I thought for sure that Julius was saying no, and he's like, yeah, I'm cool with it. So I thought, thank you. But again, you're going to have the building elevation should be based on finished construction. Okay. If you get an elevation certificate and it's under construction or it's construction drawings, that is not finished. So again, it needs to be marked. A lot of the elevation certificates are fillable PDF, so it's not a huge deal to ask the surveyor to go in and give you a finished one if they've already have it saved on their computer. Again, for benchmark utilized, I'm probably going to be infamous for this too. You want to make sure that it has GPS field procedure. Most surveyors, almost all surveyors use GPS, and then there's a navigational system that they use. So these are examples on here just for you guys to look at. So again, if I'm using Opus solution, I'm going to have GPS-Opus solution. I'm going to have GPS-T.network, but it should have something like that. Again, if I have a bolt on a fire hydrant, a nail in a pavement, we were doing an audit and somebody, and again, I asked a couple surveyors and they don't even know what this means, right? It had for the benchmark utilized, it had CB9. I think like when I get on into heaven someday, God will tell me what that means because I don't know. And then they also have like the firm derivative. That's not correct either. So that's kind of bolded a little bit to kind of bring it to your attention that if it's not calculated correctly, you need to be a little weary of everything and ask for additional information. So the vertical datum for C2 should be the same as the firm. And then you're going to indicate the elevation datum for C2A through H. So again, all these elevations should be to 1/10 of a foot. C2C, okay, so top and bottom floor should be to 1/10 of a foot. And again, if you're looking at this, in order to make sure that it's compliant with your regulations, you should be looking at B9 to see is the top of the bottom floor 1 foot above the base flood elevation. If it's not, that's a problem. Then you have the top of the next higher floor. So again, sometimes you have to look at pictures. If there's a second floor, excuse me, there should be.
Amy, 1 second. For you guys for the EC checklist, how it's designed is how Amy and I look at EC. So whenever we come into your office to do an audit, to do a CAV, we're doing a community assistance contact via the phone, and we ask to review the ECs. So this checklist is what we look at when we look at an EC. So basically, when you guys are reviewing it and we in your office, this is how we review ECs as well too. So in that way, you kind of understand when we say, hey, C2 is incorrect or C2AD is incorrect. You guys could have a clear understanding of what we're referring to. So when someone sends you an EC, before you issue that certificate of occupancy, double check, make sure everything matches up correctly. If there's errors, send it back to the surveyor, and only in the state of Tennessee, only a licensed surveyor could fill out the EC. So even if someone's an engineer, all the states do allow engineers to fill it out, but for the state of Tennessee, by law, only a licensed surveyor could fill out an EC. So if there's issues with the EC, take your own personal notes on the side and then email the surveyor or tell the property owner, hey, they have to go back and fix it, go back to the surveyor, correct everything, and then send it back to you. And then you just complete your review checklist. So what we have created for you guys is an easy process for you to do your review. So in that way, you know exactly what you're referring to and what you're speaking about when you do reach out to the surveyor and say, hey, this is not filled out correctly. You're missing the pictures. I only got page 1 out of 6. They should be providing you with 6 pages with the complete EC. So this just gives you an opportunity to verify everything correctly. Because for us, the big thing is that certificate of occupancy. As long as you haven't issued that certificate of occupancy for compliance, you still have a lot of power in your hands to go back and get things fixed. Once that EC is issued for that property, it is a lot harder to go back to the property owner and say, hey, we have discovered issues with your property is non-compliant, and trying to get them to fix stuff. It becomes a super challenge. So as long as you haven't issued that certificate of occupancy yet, you have plenty of time to go back and get that EC to get sure that structure is built in compliance. So the EC is very key for compliance for NFIP purposes. Just want to add that in.
Love it, because that's one of the things that Julia says now when we do audits. He's like, hey, I want all 6 pages. So I love it because that just kind of helps. But like we said earlier, this is kind of the same way that we look at it. So essentially, it was just me sitting down, kind of going through it like I would do it if I was reviewing one. So if you're doing this same kind of review, you're as close to me as you could possibly be with this. And a lot of times, like you guys say, oh, she's so smart, she knows this inside and out. But when I first started, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know. I mean, yes, I was coordinator, right? And everybody thinks, oh, she knew everything right off the bat. No, I didn't. So when I first looked at these elevation certificates, like, I kind of felt like you guys like, oh man, I don't know what I'm looking at. So this is kind of a way to kind of help you feel a little bit at ease and just start going through the pieces and parts of this to kind of understand what you're looking at. Now, do I expect you, once you get an elevation certificate and you start to use this checklist, it's all going to make sense and it's all going to click the very first time? No, but it's kind of like, once you start doing this, kind of like building a muscle, the more you pump iron, the more you start to have muscle memory. The same sort of thing when you're looking at this, that you'll start to understand it a little bit more. And you'll start to see like certain surveyors will do certain errors for every single elevation certificate that they do. And it's a way to kind of nicely say, hey, you got to fix this, or and educate them on some of the nuances of the program, so that they have a better understanding, so that when you get the next elevation certificate, some of the errors that you see today, maybe you won't see tomorrow. Because again, Rome wasn't built in a day. So again, making sure that you have the lowest elevation machinery equipment, to make sure that that's on there, that's 1 foot above the base flood elevation. It should be in the comment section to show what's being used and the location of it. That should be in section D. And then you're going to have the lowest adjacent grade, the highest adjacent grade, and then also making sure if there's any kind of lowest adjacent grade for deck or stairs, including structural support. Sometimes when we're looking at elevation certificates, this is left blank. And if you look at building photographs, you can see stairs going into the house, or you can see a deck with stairs off of it. So sometimes that's missing information. You want to make sure that that is completed. Another thing is that sometimes the machinery equipment, that elevation is not listed on the elevation certificate. And again, if they're not Amish, I can say that joke back home and people laugh. When I say it here, no one laughs. But again, if there's machinery equipment servicing the building, you want to make sure that it's listed on there. Again, section D, surveyors, again, are, like Julia's just mentioned, are the only professional entity that can certify elevations. If Sometimes people like to argue about this. I have one community in the state that really loves to argue with me about it. Like there's something in the water down there. But this is listed on here, and it also has the Tennessee Code annotated section that says that surveyors are the only profession that can certify elevations. So if you get in that argument with someone, you have this reference here under section D to help you with discussions. And if they still have arguments and different things, I have from the licensing board that agrees with me. So if you have questions or it continues to be an issue, please let me know. Again, is the latitude and longitude in section A provided by a licensed Tennessee land surveyor? It should be marked yes. And then the comment section for machinery equipment for C2E should be listed, and as well as the location. Section E, so this is for zone A or zone AO without a base flood elevation. Again, it should be 3 feet above the highest adjacent grade. And then for the top of the bottom floor. And then you're also going to have for the top of the bottom floor what the height is above or below the lowest adjacent grade. And then for E2, it's for building diagrams 6 through 9 that have permanent flood openings. And the next higher floor is above or below the highest adjacent grade. You're going to mark that. If there's an attached garage, you're going to have that elevation again, and that top of the slab should be 3 feet above the highest adjacent grade. And then the top of the platform of machinery or equipment servicing the building should be 3 feet above the highest adjacent grade. And then if you have zone AO, the lowest floor, including the basement, shall be elevated at least as high as a depth number specified on the flood insurance rate map in feet plus a freeboard of 1 foot above the adjacent grade, or at least 3 feet above the highest adjacent grade if there's no depth number specified on a flood insurance rate map. We don't have a lot of zone AO. We have a few communities that have it over in East Tennessee, but it's not widely used. But we put that standard in there so that if you're a floodplain administrator, you understand what to do. So we have some notes. Number 1, don't write on the document. It invalidates it. Elevation certificates should be typed, because if it's handwritten and it's sitting in the file folder for a long time, it tends to lose its integrity, and it's not always easily copied, or you can see what's going on. An elevation certificate should be kept on file forever by the local community. So it should be kept on file in perpetuity. So once you get it, no matter what you get for floodplain management, all those documents are historical. Keep them in your file folder. Don't throw them away. Like Julia said, all 6 pages should be submitted and included for full compliance. The certificate of occupancy, if you have a building inspector and you have building codes, should be issued after the deficiencies or omissions are corrected. If the FIS profile is marked as a source of the base flood elevation, should be attached. If you don't have it, ask for it. The firm is not to be used as the sole source of elevation information. The firm is only used in coastal V zones. We don't have any coastal V zones in Tennessee. I had someone ask me that a couple weeks ago. Color photographs need a caption of the view and the date, and you should at least have 2. And then pages 13 through 18 provide instructions on filling out the certificate correctly. So for the Tennessee property viewer, we wanted to go through just a little bit of instructions in case some of you have never ever used it before. If you have used it, this is just a good refresher. So the Tennessee property viewer, we have instructions as far as obtaining floodplain determination of a lot or a structure in the counties listed on the website. So these are just instructions to help you. And one of the great things is for 2 years, you weren't able to print a PDF. Now you are. So before, whenever you tried to print, it would say, you know, like print PDF, and then there'd be that user information in red that would say it was not available. They finally were able to fix that. So if you go on the Tennessee property viewer now and you want to print out a fermet, you can print out one. So again, this just has a visual schematic as far as how to go to the website, how to choose the county. And then eventually, once you put in the search information, as we showed you earlier this morning, if you have shaded areas on a parcel, you can look and zoom in and see that this is zone A, or you can see over here on the right that there's a zone AE with floodway with the crosshatch, also known as candy cane in Julius Lockhart's world. I'm going to have candy canes when you come in December, I promise you. Okay. And then you can go here. This is what it looks like at the home page and enter that information. Again, you can choose a county. You can choose a search type. So again, you can just click on that little drop down and select parcel number, owner name, property address, subdivision. So there's multiple ways that you can look at it. And then there's further information that's going to be on here as far as if you have, let's say, a county and you choose the owner name. Oh, wow. There really is a Tiny Johnson? Okay, well, all right. So you're going to enter that information in there, and then you're going to hit search. So, and then once you're going to be able to print out that PDF. So, we have some concluding thoughts for this. Local floodplain administrator, you guys really are the star of the show, right? As I've said a million times, and I will continue to say, you guys really are the rock star of your local community when it comes to floodplain management. You're really where it's at. It's almost like we're playing tennis doubles, so that you are out in front of the area, and then Julius and I are in the back to provide support. So we're kind of like the backup dancers for the rock star show, right? Because you guys are at the front of the mic, you guys are singing, people love you, adore you. We're kind of more in the background and just kind of provide support when you need it, right? So you want to make sure that when you're doing floodplain management, that you really review and evaluate your development applications. Because if you don't review them and evaluate them, if we're coming in to do an audit, or let's say, God forbid, there's a flood event, people are going to want to know what you have on file. So a lot of communities are struggling with administrative procedures. So we're providing this playbook for you to have better administrative procedure, to have a starting point, to have a solid starting point, to start to look at some of this information and to improve and enhance your local floodplain management program, right? So again, you're going to determine if it's in a special flood hazard area. There's development standards that are written in this document that you can look at and make sure that it's compliant. There's various development types there, so there's no excuse not to know what to do. And then you want to make sure that you review elevation certificates for accuracy. So another thing that I want to talk about too is that a lot of you guys punt every single thing to me, and you don't really have any comments. You're just like, well, review this or do that, or you forward every single individual to me. My job is to provide technical assistance and not do it for you. So in the future, when there's questions, if you guys send something to me, I'm really curious to know what you think, right? Do you think it's compliant? Do you not think it's compliant? Where's the hiccup where it's not making sense to you? And so Julius and I, as we move forward, if we have different citizens or we have different issues in communities, every single floodplain administrator on this call, guess what, guys? When we have a call, you're going to be on it. Because for far too long, it's always Amy, take care of it, Amy, take care of it. And then you guys are not part of the loop to understand what's going on, what the issues are, what the development, the path moving forward. So I have a new boss, and she said, Aim, they got to start taking a little bit more responsibility of what they're doing. So this is a way for you guys to kind of shine, and then I'm here to help you guys, but you guys are also going to work with me. You're going to work with Julius. You're going to work with Cheyenne. You're going to work with all of us to make sure that your program is compliant and complete, and that we build up your confidence. But we can't do it alone without you guys. So if you guys like this playbook, let us know. If there's something that's missing, let us know so that we can add to it. And then in 2023, we'll probably come out with another version. So every year there will be an update to this. So like when the new elevation certificate comes into the world, that we'll have a new link in here for that as well. And if we have to change the checklist to match those revisions, we will. So Julius, do you have anything you want to add?
No, Amy, you did an excellent job. I mean, when we was Cheyenne, Amy and I were trying to create this playbook and trying to figure out what is the need. So I told Amy my first year being the lead for Fema for the state of Tennessee, I wanted to kind of take this year to kind of get a comprehensive look at Tennessee at all 402 communities by doing audits in the western part, middle part, and eastern part of Tennessee, and trying to see what are the challenges, what are the concerns, what are the areas of weaknesses, what are the strengths of those communities, and where can we find a baseline in order to move floodplain forward. And the biggest challenge that I have seen across the board, and I'm speaking in general, I know some communities are better than others, but a lot of our communities in Tennessee don't have a floodplain management program to speak of. There's no compliance, there's no enforcement, there's no permitting. So we wanted to create a permitting guide that where we could take your regulations and make it into a practical document, because it's easy to have regulations, have 17 pages that says, hey, this is how we're going to do floodplain program for our community, but you don't have a way to make it practical. Like, how do you enforce it day to day? How do you do floodplain management from someone coming into your office and asking you, hey, I want to build over here. Hey, I want to do a non-residential building, or I wanted a mixed-use building, or I want to put in a shed. I want to do all these things. Like, how can you take your regulations and make it practical for your everyday application? And that's the vision we had, is trying to make a document that's user friendly, whether it's a Word version or fillable PDF, and make it practical for you guys to use. Because we know you guys wear multiple hats. We know it's a lot, especially if you're brand new to floodplain management, where you have just been thrown into the deep end of the pool and says, hey, you're the floodplain administrator. Julius and Amy is nagging me about floodplain management. You're going to be doing floodplain management. So we wanted to make sure that our communities are more equipped and more prepared now moving forward. Not just when a disaster happened, but during any period of the year, blue sky weather in particular. We want you guys to have the skill set, the resources to be effective at your job. So when we do have consultation meetings with Amy and I and Cheyenne, and you calling us for questions, we want you guys to be part of the conversation. It's too many times I think it's been Amy taking the lead, and Amy should be in the background with myself, and you guys are up front. Our job is to support you guys, encourage you guys, support you guys, and to help you guys to keep your communities in compliant with the program. So everything that we're doing, I know it's going to be some growing pains in the beginning. We understand that, but we're here to support you guys. So definitely big kudos to Amy and Cheyenne. They're doing a great job. Amy has been doing an excellent job for the past 8 years. And now it's just my job is just continue to support her and support all 402 communities. So definitely provide us some feedback. Like I said, there'll be more additions to this playbook as we add stuff or you guys provide us feedback. We want this to be a continual playbook that's forever being added and revised. It's not just to be on the shelf, but we want it to be used every day, and we will continue to make updates to it. But this is just the beginning of many things to come for Tennessee. So you guys are going to see a whole new floodplain program in the state of Tennessee. So this is just one step in the domino that's about to come for Tennessee.
Okay, with that, if you guys have questions, that will be happy.
I mean, we had some questions in the chat. I've been answering it as it comes up throughout, you talking. So I don't know if there's any additional questions or if people want to mute themselves and ask any additional questions or clarity on anything that was said or I put in the chat box.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm not hearing any chatter. You guys are always kind of quiet. So if you guys have any questions, just please feel free to reach out to us. Just want to say thank you to Julius and Cheyenne for helping us undertake this. And want to thank everybody that was on the call today. So hopefully you guys learned some new things today. You have a great new playbook to use. And if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to reach out to us. So I think with that, we'll conclude.
Thank you, Amy. Julius, we appreciate it. Cheyenne, y'all did a great job on this.
You're
Thank
welcome,
you,
Roger.
Amy, Julius, and Cheyenne.
You guys are welcome. Anytime.
I think we'll conclude. So thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.